Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Takeoff Podcast. On today's show, we have with us Dr. Robert Gilbert. Dr. Gilbert is a sports psychologist professor at Montclair State University, public speaker, motivational coach, but he's also the producer of the Success Hotline, which is your daily motivation, which I think today was episode 11,169. So, Dr. Gilbert, how are we doing?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. And I appreciate you making time to join us today. And how I want to get this started is just give our audience, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Wait a second. You always start this way, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do something different. Okay.
All right, let's do it.
Could you see this book?
Turn it to the left just a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, now I'm going to go through the pages and you just tell me when to stop. I think there are, let me see how many pages there are. I haven't done this in a while. 267 pages, okay? So you tell me when to stop. Well, let me take off my glasses so nobody thinks I'm cheating. Okay?
Now.
Say stop whenever you want.
Stop.
Okay. Now, could you read either of the pages?
I can read the one with your left hand. Yes, sir.
Okay. So pick out a long word on the page, but don't tell me the word. Pick out a word that's 8 or 9 or 10 or 11 letters long, but don't tell me the word.
Got it.
You got the word?
Yeah.
Okay. So now I'm doing this, Okay. So, let me see. Let's see if we could do a miracle. By any chance, did your word begin with an M or a V?
No.
No. What did it begin with?
A W.
W. Okay. Now, was your word on, could you tell if your word was on the right, the page on the right or the page on the left?
It'd be the page on the right. It was left to me, but it'll be right.
Okay, good. That's good. Could you tell if the word was in the top half of the page or the bottom half of the page?
Bottom half.
Okay. The line that your word was on, was the word in the middle, veering to the right or veering to the left?
Veering to the right.
Okay, good. Okay. Was your word, just say yes or no, was your word Winchester?
No.
No. Did your word have to do with a geographical place?
No.
No, not a country? No. Was your word walrus? No, I guess I'm not even close. Okay, we might want to restart this podcast because this isn't working too well. What was your word?
Weightlifter. And for everyone that's not is just listening, he had written the word down in a manila folder and just opened the word. Oh goodness, this is going to be great. This is awesome.
Okay, so why did I start with this? My whole career has been based on just one principle that, I think this is going to be on my tombstone. Anybody could be trained to do anything. That's what I believe. I don't believe there are poor students. I believe that students haven't learned how to study. I don't think there are poor baseball players. I have people that aren't trained, One of the things, memory. Like when I have a class of 30 people, if I say, how many of you have great memories? Maybe 2 or 3 people will put their hand up. If I say, how many of you have awful memories? Maybe 8 or 10 people. And then I say, nobody here has a great memory. Nobody here has a terrible memory. Either you have a trained memory or an untrained memory. I think anybody, I think you could train speed. I think you could train reflex and reaction time. I think anybody in the big, cop out is, well, I wasn't born to be a great athlete. No, you weren't trained to be a great athlete. So now, what I tell my students is, I said, I want to prove this point. So about 4 or 5 years ago, when I was getting a hip operation, after I got my hip operation, I lived by myself. So they put in a replace for 3 weeks. So what can I do? It was during the summer. What can I do while I'm in the rehab to totally wow my students? So I said, I'm going to memorize the book, So, but the thing is, I could train anybody to do that. And after I do that, I said, if you want to be trained to do that, see me after class. Usually nobody comes after class. Every once in a while, somebody comes and say, yeah, teach me how to do that. I said, well, before we get into the training, it's going to take at least 20 to 24 hours. Then nobody's interested, and they said, well, no, I'm not that. I said, are you kidding me? If you do this once, you'll have it for the rest of your life, But people, so I call it the coachability index. Number 1, are you willing to be coached? And number 2, are you willing to change? So if, number 1, are you willing to be coached? And number 2, are you willing to change? So let me tell you a story about a kid who was willing to be coached and he was willing to change. He was a pretty good high school player, and he was playing in the minor leagues, and he was doing pretty well, minor league baseball. And all of a sudden they started throwing him curveballs, and he couldn't hit a curveball. So he's in Kansas City, and he calls up his dad, who is in Oklahoma, and he says, and he's crying on the phone. He said, Dad, I'm in over my head. I can't do it. And his father, is like, what's wrong with my kid? Because this kid was a tough kid. So he said, where are you? And he tells him, he says, you stay right there. And his father got in his pickup, and how many hours is it from Oklahoma to Kansas City, Missouri? Well, all the while he's saying, what am I going to say to the kid? What am I going to say to the kid? He walks into the hotel room not knowing what he's going to say to the kid. And then he said, hey, where's your suitcase? And the kid gives him, he's over there. He picks up the suitcase and goes through the drawers and starts throwing all the clothes. Said, Dad, what are you doing? He said, I thought I raised a man. I guess I was wrong. I'm taking you home. Said, like hell you are. I'll show you. And that was a turnaround in Mickey Mantle's life.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. So here's my question. So you say this to your students.
Well, I don't want you to ask me any questions. There's only one thing I want to talk about.
All right.
The only thing that I could do to help any coach in America is it's only about one thing: telling stories. If you become a better storyteller, you become a better coach. I don't know if this is politically correct to say anymore, but suppose you went to a knife fight with a gun, you'd have an unfair advantage. The fact that all coaches aren't great storytellers, are you kidding me? I mean, how far are X's and O's going to get you? I don't know too many people that say, I was in the coach's office and on his chalkboard, he did all this X's and O stuff. And wow, I'm motivated now. Stories motivate people. And, I think that's the greatest thing we could talk about because, stories have been, there was a teachers have always used stories, but there was a teacher a couple of thousand years ago. They didn't call them stories way back. They called them parables. And he didn't travel much. He went about 30 miles from where he lived, but he used to tell parables all the time. And we still talk about this teacher. His name was Jesus. He taught by stories. So if you find any motivator, any person, like I've been teaching in college for 42 years. And when I see some of my students and I say, what do you remember most about my class? And they always say the stories. They never say, I remember my grade, because they usually don't. They usually don't say, I remember the other kids in the class. They usually don't. They remember the stories because facts fade, stories stick. Facts fade, stories stick.
So as a coach, how do you know which stories are the most effective?
Now, that is a very good question. So here's the thing as a storyteller. You have to tell the right story in the right way to the right group at the right time. And that's the art of telling a story, and that comes with experience, but there's no wrong story. There's no wrong, the stories, it's not like, oh my God, I told the wrong story, the kid's in a betting slump. That's never going to happen. There are certain stories that are more effective than others. And the next thing I want to say, some people are going to object to, but the story does not have to be true. It just has to be effective. The story does not have to be true. So suppose you're one of my ball players and you're in a slump, and you come to my office one day and I said, hey, Jake, you remind me of a kid. Ever since, you've been on the team, you reminded me of him, his name was Louis. And, Louis was going through the same thing you were going through. And then I tell this whole story. I said, I told Louis to do da, 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 da. And all of a sudden, Louis got out of the slump and he had 460 for the rest of the year, da, da, da. And it doesn't have to be true, but the fact that you think that you could be like Louis, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So you just tell stories. The greatest therapists, the greatest psychologists, they tell stories all the time. So there was a guy named Milton Erickson. He was a hypnotist, but he wasn't the hypnotist like you think of, but he was a storyteller. And he told people stories that stuck in their mind. So Jake, this is not what you were expecting, huh?
No, not at all. You caught me off guard, but I like where it's going. But so here's my question is why are stories, and even with this technology age group that we're coaching, you still believe stories are the most effective way?
That's a really good point. Even though technology is getting better and better every day, Netflix is more viewed than ever before. Yeah. We love stories. Somebody once said that God made so many human beings because God loves stories. A woman named Muriel Rukeyser said, the universe is not made of atoms. It is made of stories. Human beings are storytelling animals. Suppose you picked up one of your friends from the airport and they just got back from Europe, mm-hmm. and you're driving him or her home. What are you going to talk about? Oh, I was in Amsterdam, this happened. And when I was in Belgium, this happened. That's what we do. You go to a reunion. It's all stories. Nobody cares about facts. It's all about stories. And we just love stories. Nobody has ever, I'm sure maybe somebody out here could object to this, but none of my students never have. And one of the things I say in class, which I think is outrageous. I think it's true, but I'm not sure. And I say the biggest industry in the world is stories. It's a bigger industry than pharmaceutical. It's bigger than big pharma. It's bigger than the military-industrial complex. Every newspaper stories. With the NFL is a perfect story. We tell a story on Sunday. Then you have 6 days to think about it. Then we tell another story on Sunday, and we go on for 16 or 17 weeks, and then we make the story smaller, and we have fewer. Baseball is, it's a daily story. That's why baseball gets inside of us. So every book is a story. Harry Potter is a story. All sports are a story. Sports writers are storytellers. Everything that we love is a story. And look at it. Every movie's a story. Every documentary is a story. Like tonight, what is today? The 19th? So yes. Today is September 19th, 2021. And I can't wait until tonight because at least in New York at 9:00, Ken Burns, who's a documentarian, the multi-part series on baseball by Ken Burns. Yes. Well, he's a genius storyteller. And so tonight, it's the first part of a 4-part series on Muhammad Ali.
Yes, that is tonight.
And I'm 74 years old, and I think Muhammad Ali is the mentally toughest, not only the athlete, I think he's the mentally toughest person of my lifetime. So let me tell you a couple of Ali stories. Yes. Now, what is meant? So if you want to, if a kid says to you, Coach, what's mental toughness? You could say, oh, well, let's look it up in the dictionary. and the kid will fall asleep. But I say, let me tell you a story about the great Muhammad Ali. When he was the champion of the world, he was training for his next fight. And he used to have his fans come and watch him train. So one day he's training, and in the ring, he's doing sit-ups. And he's counting 221, 222, 223, 224, 225. And then he stops, gets out of the ring, towels down, gets some water. And one of the fans comes up, hey, champ, how many sit-ups did he do? And Ali said, well, I'm not quite sure. And he said, what do you mean? You're not quite sure. I heard you counting. And Ali said, oh, I only start counting when they start hurting. I only start counting when they start hurting. That is mental toughness, you know?
Wow.
Most kids, what do? You
From
tell
the
them
beginning,
to do 50 sit-ups, they'll do
they
50.
do 50.
You tell them 60, you do 60. You tell them 60, they won't do 61.
No.
Muhammad Ali doesn't even start counting till they start getting tough, you know?
So, and when you look at the mental toughness side of it, and this is a question, and I know it's a little off the story topic, but like you talk about Muhammad Ali, let's talk about Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, Tom Brady, those mindsets. Okay, here's my question, and me and my coaching staff, we had this debate this past week about, is that born or developed?
Well, if they were born with that, I don't think anybody would need us, you know? I think it's all, I mean, you know, do I know the answer to that? Of course not. Yeah. Does anybody know the answer to that? Of course not. But my whole life is based on the fact that I could take any kid, like I coach baseball and wrestling at the same time. And, you know, which was a weird combination. But I mean, I believed I could make any kid into a superstar. Now, do I have data to prove it? No. Did I have any major leaguers come out of my little league team? No. But it's a lot more fun to thinking, you know, I could train this kid and he could become 1,000,000 times better than he is now. And I think when we say, well, you know, there are the haves and the have-nots, so the people who are born with it. I think we're all born with it. But there's a quote that goes, many champions are born and then unmade. I think coaches unmake kids more often than they make kids. You know, I don't know if this statistic is, oh, by the way, if I say anything and you have more up-to-date knowledge on the subject than I do, please email me. My email is sendmeastory@aol.com. Now, if you don't think I'm serious about stories, and my email is sendmeastory@aol.com, you know I'm pretty serious about stories. So the old statistic I knew, I think it was from a study from Berkeley, that by age 14, 75% of kids in America drop out of organized sports. By age 14, 75% of kids in America drop. Now, most of my students that I say that to, they say, yeah, that happened in my group. You know, most kids
say that.
You know, yeah. So is a coach, you know, what makes a great coach? Like I had a speaker in my class the other day, and he's coaching freshman volleyball, freshman girls volleyball. And one of my students asked him, he said, well, how do you know if you're a good coach? He said, if all 15 of the girls on my team this year go out for volleyball next year, then I know I'm a good coach. If my passion rubs off on them, that they stay with volleyball. But, you know, I think this happens a lot in cross country. You meet people who are made to be superstar high school cross country runners, and they never ran again for the rest of their life because their coach might have trained them to be a champion, but there was too much pain involved, you know? He might have turned them on to winning, but he didn't turn them on to the passion part of it.
So how did you get those kids to understand the passion that I have for baseball as I get up in front of them? You know, it's almost, as you're saying, that there's a missing piece with the coaching or the leadership today. What do you believe that is?
Yeah. Well, this comes back to the very beginning before I rudely interrupted you with this. And what we were going to talk about was the most important thing is that your kids believe that you believe. You can teach them to be passionate, you know, but it's like a virus. They could catch it. You know, passion can't be taught. It has to be caught. So but by the first 5 minutes of the first day of practice, the kids know whether you're into it or not. Just like in the classroom. In the first 5 minutes, you know who's into it. You know, there are only two types of students. Those are in class and those are interclass. There are only two types of athletes. Those are in a sport and those are into a sport. Like in means you're involved, enrolled. Like you're in class, it means you're enrolled. Into means you're involved. You know, so and the same thing with coaches. I mean, you know, the coaches that are just doing it for the paycheck, and those coaches that would do it for nothing. You know, and you know, I could tell that you just love baseball, and your kids know that you love baseball. So, as I said once on the hotline message, suppose you move to a new town and you're looking for a church. So you start going to different churches on Sundays to, you know, check them out. And you listen to all these ministers. And within a couple of minutes, you know, I'm not asking you whether you believe in God, but you know whether the minister believes in God, you know? Like I show my students a video to make this point of T.D. Jakes, one of the great ministers of currently. And after I show it to him, I said, look, listen to this question. I'm not asking you whether you believe in God. I'm asking you whether you believe he believes in God, you know? So I'm not asking you whether you like baseball. What I want to know is, do you think I love baseball? You know, do you believe that I believe? So when I do sales trainings, I mean, what's the use of selling something unless you believe in it? I mean, do you believe that I believe that the Subaru is the best car ever made? Do you believe that I believe that these pots and pans? So one of the most famous people from Mississippi, from Yazoo City, is that the name of the town? Yazoo City, Mississippi.
Yazoo.
Yazoo?
Yeah.
And do you know who's from Yazoo City, Mississippi? The great Zig Ziglar. Ever hear of Zig Ziglar?
Yes. Yes.
So Zig Ziglar, the grandfather of motivational speaker in this country. Well, I think when he got out of college, you know, there was no motivational speaking back then. He started selling pots and pans door to door. And, you know, Zig is a nice guy. He's a smart guy. He's a good looking guy. And this company hires him. You know, back then you could go door to door without getting shot. And after his whole training, and he's selling a great line of products, the sales trainer comes down and spends the day with him. He said, Zig, we can't figure out. We had such high hopes. You haven't sold a thing in 3 weeks. So he spends the day with Zig, and he said, they sit down at the end of the day, and Zig had another day without any sales. And the guy said, Zig, can I ask you a question? Do you own our pots and pans? And Zig said, well, no, I'm going, as soon as I get enough money, I'm going to buy a set. He said, that's the problem. You don't believe in them enough, you know?
Wow.
The kids know, they know immediately which people are coaching for the paycheck and which people, you know, they'd rather coach baseball than anything in the world, you know?
Absolutely. So as you sit there and you talk about that coach and you talk about the passion that they have, what are some of those characteristics you think got those players are looking for?
Energy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they just want energy. They want somebody, you know, they want to feel better about themselves at the end of practice than the beginning of practice. They want to leave practice more energized than when they came in. You know, they want you to inspire them, but they won't act that way. They'll act cool, calm, and collected. But, you know, there's a quote that said, adults are babies in big bodies. And that goes for high school kids too. High school kids are babies in big bodies. I mean, they still have the needs. They still have to feel good about themselves. And I think the biggest, the most deadly disease in our culture, like every year, about 850,000 people die from heart disease. And every year about 650 or 550 die from cancer. And this past year, I just heard a frightening statistic. 1 out of every 500 people in this country has died from COVID. You know, we've lost almost 700,000 people. But even with those statistics, I tell my students, the biggest disease in our country is LOSE. And LOSE stands for lack of self-esteem. And lack of self-esteem means you're walking around totally healthy and you don't feel good about yourself. There's no spark inside you, you know? Like Pete Rose had a spark.
Yes, he did.
Do you know how Pete Rose got the name? You know, his nickname was Charlie Hustle. Do you know how he got that nickname?
The way he played the game.
Well, it was his first, the year he was going to be brought up, and the Reds were having a spring training game against the Yankees. And so Pete Rose is like running into the dugout, running out of the dugout, running out. You know, he gets a walk, he runs to first base, and Mickey Mantle looks at him and he says, "Who does that kid think he is? Charlie Hustle?"
Wow.
So it was a negative, you know.
Yeah.
But you know what? Mickey had that inside him too, because when I'm in New Jersey, when Mickey died, the newspapers around here for about a week or 10 days ran all the letters that people sent in. And one guy sent in a letter. He said, "I remember when I was a kid and my father took me to a game one Wednesday afternoon, and the Yankees were losing 8-1, and it was the bottom of the ninth, and there was one out, and Mickey got up. There was no way the Yankees were going to win this game. So Mickey's in the left-handed batter's box, and he, tops one, hits a slow grounder to second base, and he slips coming out of the batter's box, and he couldn't get up. So on his hands and knees, he's dog paddling to first base as hard as he could. I mean, so Mickey was a Charlie Hustle too,
Yeah, and as I go back, it just with what you said about Lou's lack of self-esteem. Now, with that, and I agree with you 110% on just how there's not a lot of players or people that walk around with a lot of self-esteem. So how do coaches, teachers, professors, business leaders, I mean, is it our job to help them with their self-esteem or give them self-esteem, or when does it become on the individual?
I could not think of a more important thing we could do. I mean, if you have a kid and he doesn't become a great ball player, but he feels better about himself, you did a great job,
Yeah.
because what's going to happen when he becomes a husband, when he becomes a father, when he becomes a teacher and a coach? But guess what? Once you feel better about yourself, you do become a better ball player.
Yeah, I agree. Yes,
See, most people say, when I'm a good ball player, when I'm a good ball player, then I'll feel better about myself. No, when you feel better about yourself, then you become a good ball player.
Yes.
When I hit 400, then I'll have confidence. No, when you have confidence, then you'll hit 400. So as you could tell, I grew up you might not be able to tell, I grew up in Boston. But the reason I love talking to you is when I was growing up, all I ever wanted to do was be the third baseman for the Red Sox. That's all I ever wanted to do. I mean, the first day I walked into Fenway Park, it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. I mean, to see a major league, it was just gorgeous. And I had a hero, and his name was Ted Williams. And Ted Williams, and I'd argue the greatest hitter who ever lived, when he, way back when I was growing up, my mom and dad would let me go to the ballpark with my friends, not at night, but for day games. And of course, we'd go as early as we could and watch batting practice. But just like I told you about Mickey Mantle, if Ted Williams were up in the bottom of the ninth inning and the Red Sox were behind 8-1, and he got us up to bat, all of a sudden, the whole ballpark would go quiet. There'd be a reverence because they knew a master was at work. Wow. I mean, it was, just watch some YouTube videos of the way he dug in. And, and this guy, do you know what he used to say? They said, "Ted, what was your goal? What was your dream?" He said, "I only wanted to do one thing. I just wanted to walk down the street and people point to me and say, there goes the greatest hitter who ever lived." So a couple of weeks ago, I had a kid call me up from my hotline. He said, "Dr. Gilbert, I'm a high school ball player and I want to make it to the major leagues." And I said, "Well, what position do you play?" He said, "I'm a center fielder." I said, "You must be a pretty good hitter." He said, "Yeah, I'm the best hitter on my team." I said, "Okay. How much batting practice do you take?" And he said, 10 or 15 minutes a day. I said, "Well, when I was growing up, there was a guy that played for the Red Sox named Ted Williams, and he grew up in San Diego. And when he was your age, he used to take batting practice. As a matter of fact, all the money his mother gave for allowance, he used to pay people to pitch to him." But I say to the kid, I said, "How much batting practice do you think he took?" He said, "Well, maybe 20 or 25 minutes. I said, "No, he used to keep swinging the bat until his hands bled. When his hands bled and he couldn't hold on to the bat, then he was done. That's a little more than 15 minutes. So we gotta give, so stories give people these like revelations, like, wow, you're not telling kid, you didn't tell the kid he's not working hard enough. Ted Williams told him. So when I was in college, I went to University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and I was on the wrestling team. And while I was on the wrestling team at UMass, there was another guy at Iowa State University named Dan Gable. You ever hear of Dan Gable?
He wasn't
Dan
bad.
Gable, huh?
I said he wasn't bad, huh?
Well, he wasn't bad. He won a couple of NCAA championships. He won the Olympic gold medal. As a matter of fact, in the Olympics, nobody scored a
Never
point.
got a point. Yes.
Yeah, which is like throwing 3 no-hitters in the World Series. So anyway, Dan Gable is giving a talk in Hamilton High School in Southern Jersey. And I had this question. So I go down and I sit through his talk, and everybody wants an autograph and a selfie. And then I wait till nobody else is there except the organizers. I said, Dan, can I ask you kind of a strange question? And he's a very nice, kind man. He said, you can ask me anything you want. I said, how come you won everything as a wrestler and I won nothing? And he said, well, where'd you go to school? I said, UMass Amherst. He said, I went to Iowa State. Like, I do that. He said, what time did you work out? I said, 4 to 6:15, 4 to 6:30. He said, yeah, we did too. He said, what did you do at the end of practice? He said, well, we used to do condition. He said, yeah, we did too. He said, what did you do when practice was over? I said, well, to tell you the truth, I crawled to my locker. I was so tired. I took a shower, I got dressed, and I went to eat. He said, well, that's the difference between you and me. He said, well, when practice was over, I went to my locker and I put on a rubber suit and I put on a hoodie and I put on my sweatpants and I got my jump rope and I went back into the wrestling room and I jump roped until I passed out. Now, when he said I jump roped until I passed out, you know how these cartoons are over your head and you can see two. So I see an image of Rob Gilbert eating a pork chop and Dan Gable working harder than any athlete in the world, So of course he was an Olympic champion, and of course I wasn't. And you know what, Jake? He never passed out. In the 1972 Olympic issue of Sports Illustrated, it said Dan Gable just might be the hottest working athlete in the world. Nobody outworked Dan Gable, So of course nobody scored a point on him. Mm-hmm. And they said, Dan, what motivates you? He said, every time I feel like quitting, I wonder what the Russians are doing. And he knew he would have to beat a Russian, and he did. And the Russian didn't score a point on him either.
So as we go we talk about Dan Gable, and as he feels like quitting, so he's trying to jump rope until he passes out. But obviously, he's not feeling good. He's suffering at this time. Muhammad Ali, he don't start counting until we're hurting. So how do we get athletes to understand, hey, good things come from suffering?
Well, I just got off the TV. That's why I wanted to this time, because one of my former students and colleagues is named Mark Lassini, and his team, the Chaos Lacrosse Club, just won the world championship in the Premier Lacrosse League. And Mark Lassini deserves this because he's the guy that works out until he passes out. I mean, I have never heard of anybody working hard. I mean, he's like a Jerry Rice with the hill. But how do you get kids? See, the thing is, nobody ever talks about, you're the first coach I ever heard say the word suffer. Nobody ever talks about suffering. We got to talk about suffering, because if you want to be great, you have to suffer.
Absolutely.
So, but then you say, well, what's suffering? Well, John Wooden is, right? So the John Wooden of swimming was a guy in the 50s and 60s named Doc Councilman from Indiana University. Many of our Olympic swimmers came right from his training at Indiana University. So the first day of practice at Indiana University, he used to bring everybody on the swimming deck before they went in the water. And over the pool, there was a banner that had 3 words on it: hurt, pain, agony. And he gave his little speech that he gave every year. He said, if you want to swim for me here at Indiana, every day you have to come here and train until you hurt. But if you have higher goals and you want to be an NCAA champ, or you want to be a national champ, you have to come here every day and train until you're in pain. But if you have higher goals and you want to be a world and Olympic champ, you have to come here and train until you're in agony. He said, the difference is whether you turn hurt, pain, agony, that's what you're going to get. He said, But whatever you choose, by the time you're done with practice, you go back in the locker room and you get dressed, everything, homeostasis, everything's going to go back to normal. So are you willing? How much are you willing to suffer? How much are you willing to suffer? And baseball is not, people don't suffer in baseball by breathing too hard or lifting too much. They suffer from boredom, and they just can't keep their mind on what's happening. So it's a different type of, I really think the suffering you get, the boredom that you get from studying is a lot harder to deal with than the pain you feel from working out,
Absolutely. Well, and it goes back to one of the two questions. I think without getting to the suffering point, how can we change? And that goes back to the question of, are you willing to change? You got to do something different every day. It's kind of like Coach Councilman. You got to train if you want to be so good, you got to hurt. Well, if you want to take it another step, you got to train till you're in pain. And then let's take it another step of change. And hey, you got to do it till you're in agony. Yeah. Does that make sense? I mean, yeah. Just to where, because I just put those two together. Are you willing to change? Well, hey, how much suffering are you willing to go through?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's back in the 50s. Life's a little different now in 2021. How do we get these kids in this day and age to understand that, hey, your setbacks, your failures are setting you up for great things to come?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to convince them that they have all the ability they need already inside them. Secondly, that we have the strategies that will take them to the next level. I know exactly what you have to do to be a better student. I know exactly what you have to do to be better. I know exactly what you have to do. One of the great bodybuilders of all time, his name is Chris Dickerson. And I think he's won more international bodybuilding awards than anybody ever. And I went to an awards dinner where he was being honored. And somebody asked him, he said, Chris, how did you become so great? He said, well, I was 22 years old. I never even saw bodybuilding. And just by chance, one day I walked into a bodybuilding gym. And I immediately said, I want to do this. The spark went on in my brain. I want to do this, this spark. And so I asked the woman at the front desk, he said, how can I learn more about that? Oh, Mr. Pearl's in his office. Well, little did he know that he was walking into the office of the greatest bodybuilding mind in the history of the world, Bill Pearl, the guy that wrote all the books. And he said, Mr. Pearl, I want to be a bodybuilder. And he said, well, I could train you. So he said, you want to know how I became a great bodybuilder? Mr. Pearl told me what to do, and I did it. 2 steps. Mr. Pearl told me what to do. I didn't bitch. I didn't complain. I did it. So how much do you want it? It's not complicated. I'm going to tell you to be at study hall 3 hours a night. If you want to be a doctor, you'll do it. If you don't want to be, I just had one of my students call me up the other day, and her freshman year, she did really well. And then for 3 semesters, she did terribly in school, and she wants to go to physical therapy school. And she's talking about all her hardships. The thing I guess I could have been more honest, but we're in a competitive culture. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have like a 3.6 or 3.7, you're not going to get into physical therapy school. And maybe I'm even underestimating. Maybe it has to be a 3.8. And I told her to get a master's degree in another field and get your grades up and work with people on research. But, we have our shot, and take your shot, as they talk about in Hamilton with that song. You got a shot and take it. So, basically, there's only one question you have to answer, whether you want to be great in school or sports or sales or business. Are you going to go all out, or are you going to hold back? That's it. Are you going to go all out, or are you going to hold back? So, let's see. Oh, it seems like you're married, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So when you asked, what's your wife's name? Shelby. So you said, Shelby, I'm just supposing you proposed. I said, Shelby, would you marry me? And she said, can I think about it? I got to figure this out. I was speaking to I had him come to my class, the assistant or the associate softball coach at Florida State University. And Florida State is big time softball.
Yes.
He told my class that every day he gets 200 emails from around the world of kids that want to come to Florida State. So I said, could you read all 200 emails? And he said, no, I can't. I said, well, what do I have to write you to get you to answer an email? And said, in the subject line, you have to write something like, I want to be a Seminole.
Oh.
And this is what he does. He said a couple of years ago, a young woman came and she was being totally honest. And she said, you know, I like your campus and I like your program. And it's, you know, I'm narrowing it down between UCLA and Florida State. And he said, go to UCLA. See, you only wanted to marry Shelby if she was all in, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, are you going to go all out or are you going to hold back? Are you going to say, let me think about it? I don't know about Florida State, maybe UCLA, you know? I mean, it's a very simple choice. Are you going to go all out or hold back? And most kids hold back.
Absolutely. So why do you think that is, though? And I know we don't have all the answers, and I get that, but I mean, you've done this 40 plus years. I mean, how have you seen the way these kids think and act and over your career?
Well, first of all, I don't think kids have changed at all. The technology, you know, it's interesting. Technology gets better every day, but we don't, you know? We're not getting better every day. Who knows? What do you think, Jake? If we had an all-star game between ball players from the 20s and 30s versus our guys, who do you think would win?
It's tough. It's just two different brands of game. I would say,
I mean, do you think Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Jimmy Fox? I mean, that would be pretty hard to beat.
I don't know how you can go against those guys. But it's so different. You know, like you said, you just brought up the technology, and there's so many different things that I don't want to say that are making these players great, but back then it was just on raw ability. Whereas today, let me get on the mound or let me get in front of this machine and hit, and it's going to tell me everything. That I need to know and adjust to.
How do we get kids to go all out? They have to see us going all out.
I agree with that.
They have to see us being the first teacher at school in the morning and the last one to leave.
110%.
They have to come into our office in the middle of the winter and you're reading a book on baseball. You know, they have to know that this is the passion, you know? I mean, look, you don't have to do this podcast. And, you know, and I'm one of the few people on this podcast that's not a baseball guy, right?
Right, correct.
You don't want to talk to me. I'm not a baseball guy.
No, I want to talk to you.
I bet before you go on, you say, I hope this guy's not a loser, right?
No, but it's just like, I think more people need to talk to people like you, though, because it's like you said, the strategies. Yeah, everybody knows X's and O's at our level. You know, we know how to teach how to hit, how to run, how to do those things. But I think the difference is that's going to make us different than other people's the way we train between the ears.
Yeah, I think that's true. But I think it's like there's a Sanskrit word called Shaktipad, SHAKTIPAD, and it means exchange of energy. So as I was talking about, when your players are on the field, there's an exchange of energy between you and them. When you're at a rock concert, there's an exchange of energy between the rock star and the audience. You know, there's a exchange of energy between the teacher and the student. And, you know, and we have to have but the exchange of energy doesn't mean it's going to be positive. It could be a negative exchange of energy, but it's always happening. And, you know, like some of the biggest debates I have in my class are whether it's all right to hit a kid, you know, if you're the parent.
Oh.
And, you know, and the kids would say, well, you know, I turned out all right and my dad hit me. And so I asked a very well-known psychologist, is it all right to hit a kid? And he said, yeah, if you want the kid to hate you for the rest of his life, you know. Yeah. I mean, it's not, I mean, is it all right to criticize it? I mean, you know, it's so easy to say something that just cuts to there, you know.
Yeah. And especially in what I've seen is and it's so funny. We had this conversation again the other day, just with things going on and just looking at the world from the outside lens. And it's, like, and I love that you said it a minute, kids hadn't changed, but maybe the standards and the way the people over them are holding them, or like you said, energizing them, inspiring them, maybe that's the change that's happening. And it's not just, oh, the kids, they're different. Well, no, maybe it's the people that are leading them are different.
Yeah, yeah. I had a woman in my class the other day who was an animal trainer, and she said, I don't train animals. I don't train animals who have problems. I train animals. The animals, the people think they have a dog problem. No, the animals have a people problem. It's usually not the animal; it's usually their owner that causes the problems.
I got
But
two little dogs in there that agree with that.
I think the thing is we have to come to that our kids have unlimited potential. And then if we teach them the right strategies, they could really excel. But we could just stab them in the back by criticizing them and, getting them to think too much.
So how does this go into, and this is kind of not about sports, but take it into the education realm today?
Yeah.
What do you think? How does that evolve? How can we better our education system? Do we tell stories? What kind of strategy are you seeing there that could be tweaked?
Well, I think we relentlessly commit ourselves to getting kids to feel good about themselves.
Yeah.
We have to be relentless, and not just in my class, in all classes. We got to get kids to, by the time kids get to college, they don't want to read.
No.
I don't know what I'd do if I couldn't read. But these kids, they've been, look at the stuff we have them read, like Shakespeare. When I was in the 9th or 10th grade, I had this Mr. Resnick, and he'd have us read a couple of acts of Macbeth. And then the next day, he'd pick out innocuous phrases, and we had to say, who said this to whom, under what circumstances? And I always fantasized that Shakespeare would be in our classroom, seeing what he was doing with this great work, giving these stupid tests. And we have to, so if people want to know what to do, watch Dead Poets Society with Robert Williams, watch the old movie from the 50s, The Music Man with Robert Preston, watch Stand and Deliver, watch these movies about teachers who inspired kids. And the word inspire comes from the Latin word to breathe in. We can inspire, and kids want to be inspired. They really, really do. They don't want to be average, but they don't see a way out. And, another thing we could do is we get rid of gifted and talented programs. As soon as I know I'm not gifted and talented, I think that what gifted and talented is, so if everybody knew so much, why was Tom Brady drafted 199 in the 6th round? Why
still going at 43?
What was Mike Piazza? I think he was drafted in the 62nd round.
As a favor.
Yeah, 1,130, I think.
Yeah, Michael Jordan gets cut off his 9th grade basketball team. It's a thing that I think, because I love the storytelling, I love the inspiration. I was lucky enough to play for a guy that, and I do it to this day. Our pregame meeting before game is a story. I tell a story. Skip Berkman, he's one of the greatest of all time. Augie Garrido, all those guys did those things way before this time. But my question would be,
let me ask you, Bergman, okay. Who's Bergman? I don't know.
Berkman. Skip Berkman at LSU.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he legend. AD or was AD. He told stories because he has what he calls the process, and as he says it in that Cajun accent. And he was telling stories. Coach Bianco down at Ole Miss, he tells stories pregame. And my coach was Richie Harrelson at Lafayette High School, which is now at Northeast Community College. He told stories. And it's in the office, but it's like I've gone through these stories of mine that I have, and I looked up a book, and I'd have to see it in the office, and I can email you the name of it, but it's just stories, motivational stories to give, mainly because it's like you said, by game time, there's not a lot I can do for you. There's no strategy, there's no X's. We got to go execute what we've been doing. And I can't put anything in by then. And a lot of time with the tension and the emotions running, it gives those guys a chance to kind of put themselves. And I think this is what storytelling does for us so great. Like you were talking about a minute ago, instead of degrading a kid, you tell a story about the guy hitting, or Ted Williams hitting till his hands bleed. Well, I immediately think about my hands bleeding from hitting.
Mm,
I don't
yeah.
think about a negative. I think about how long would it take for my hands to bleed. So it puts me in that scenario.
So let me tell you a few stories that coaches could use. One day when Ty Cobb was 74 years old, and I think Cobb retired with the highest lifetime batting average. I think it was 367. And one day he's all by himself in a minor league baseball game outside of Atlanta. So a local sports writer sees the Hall of Famer sitting all by himself. So he introduced himself and he said, "Mr. Cobb, do you mind if I sit with you?" So they watched the game together. And then he said, "Mr. Cobb, if you were playing nowadays, what do you think you'd hit? You hit 367. What do you think you'd hit?" And he said, "I'd probably only hit 300. He said, "Are you kidding me? I thought you were going to say 400. He said, "The ball's a lot livelier. I mean, with the artificial turf, your ground balls would whip through. Why would you only hit 300? He said, "Well, son, you have to realize I'm 74 years old." And then Pete Rose, who broke Cobb's record for most lifetime hits, you don't remember, but when Pete Rose was chasing Ty Cobb's record, this is before the internet. And that's when people used to read newspapers. So just about every newspaper in America would have the Pete Rose countdown. Pete Rose, 62 hits, 54 hits. So Pete Rose needed 14 hits to break Cobb's record. Pete Rose was like a lifetime 300 hitter. And so a sports writer said, "Pete, you need 14 hits to break Cobb's record. How many at-bats will you need?" And what do you think? He said 14. Because he was acting as if it was impossible to fail. That's how he thought. He didn't let the statistics get in the way of his belief system,
And I just sit here and I listen, and obviously I could keep going on for days just with the questions. And as we talk about these guys, I think back to their preparation, just like geez, I forgot his name already. The wrestler, and how we talked about him and his preparation. And it seems like that confidence is there in all these guys just because of what they've done before they get to the competition.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the way it is. That's the way it is.
And as we start to wrap this up, I want to talk about the Success Hotline, because it's funny, I have listened to it before. It's kind of like I told you about the book, read
Yeah.
this tonight and you win tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's just funny
Yeah.
how our paths have crossed before. But I look you up on the Success Hotline. I put it on Twitter where I'm already following it. Well,
Yeah.
then all of a sudden I get into the podcast and I'm like, well, what is going on? Because the first time we talked, you said, "Hey, hang up the phone and call this number." And I'm like, what do we mean call this number? And it's just funny. But talk about, and you've been doing this since 1992, right?
Yeah.
So why? And this is before cell phones. This is before all this stuff today you can just look at yourself and look at the camera and record it and bam, it's there. But we continue to do it this way. But just explain to our listeners how you came up with just the Success Hotline and what it is, just so, because I know people that listen to this are gonna want to call it and check it out.
Yeah. Well, I was teaching a graduate class. A lot of coaches were in my class, and my graduate class met one night a week for 2.5 hours. And I realized that when I used to coach high school wrestling, I would meet with my kids 5 or 6, sometimes 7 times a week. And with these students, I'm seeing them one day a week. And, nothing's going to change in one day a week. So I said, how could I be with my students every single day, even though I'm not with them I'm only with them one day a week. So I said, okay, what if I leave a 3-minute phone message? And I was only going to do it for one semester. I was only going to do it for 14 weeks. But after 14 weeks, so many people had been calling it, interesting people from all over the country, sometimes all over the world, that I've never stopped. So I think today's message 11,170 or something.
Hmm.
And so if people want to know how to get more stories, just listen to my hotline every day. And
Absolutely.
then there's a podcast, um, and the Success Hotline. If you put in the Success Hotline, you'll come up with a podcast. And so there's like a year's worth of messages. And then there's another podcast that there are a couple of hundred more messages there. And so what I do is I just search for the best stories I could find and I put them on there.
So, and that's a question that I'd love to ask you is, what do you type in to find these stories, just in case someone wants to start doing that themselves?
I don't type in anything. They just come to me. I mean, I have people, I leave a 3-minute message and people will, then there's a beep and people have a minute to leave me a message. I have these story scouts all over the world that are leaving me stories every day. There's, oh, Dr. Gilbert, because, the whole thing is I'm giving them stuff, so they give me stuff. I don't ask
Absolutely.
them to do it. They just do it. Like the other day, a guy sent me something. I thought this was I haven't figured out how to use it yet. So suppose with your team, you have a $1 bill and a $100 bill. And you say, what's the difference? Are they difference in size? No. Are they difference in weight? No. Then are they difference in strength? No. Do you hear them? Well, yeah. Everything is the same. Are they same color? Yeah. The only difference between the $100 bill and the $1 bill is what's written on them, you
Hmm.
know. And so what's written on your mind? Winner or loser? What kind
Wow.
of messages do you give yourself? What are you telling yourself? Because so I'm not sure how I'm going to use that, but that's the raw material.
Yes. And for our guys
Oh,
that are,
let me give you this one.
okay, go ahead.
Here's one I used at the beginning of but you could use this in with your athletes. When they come to practice, get them all sitting together, give them all 2 pieces of paper and have them make both of them into like balls of paper balls. Then you say, okay, and you're standing right in front of them with your hands by your sides. And you say, at the count of 3, I want you to throw your paper ball at me as hard as you can. 1, 2, 3. And they, then they'll think you're out of your mind. Then you say, okay, don't do anything with the other ball. Because on a scale of 1 to 10, I expect for myself, my energy to be at least a 9.8 every single day of practice, every single game. And if my energy ever goes below a 9.8, I want you to throw that other ball at me to show everybody that I'm losing it. But then my question is, could I do the same with you? Because I expect myself high energy when we win, high energy when we lose. I don't expect you could come into the game and the loss of the 7th inning, and if we're losing by 15 runs, nobody would be able to tell it by my demeanor, because I'm going to act like an energized winner all the time. So could I ask, could you act the same way? So that's what I do with my students.
Wow. That's amazing. And that's a great, and again, but it just, like I said, it just puts you in that situation and you learn by that, just by listening to you say that. It's like the standard of that energy level that we have to bring it every day. It just puts me there. And heck,
Yeah.
if you want to carry around the paper balls, and when they get below that energy, bam, and that you don't have to berate them. You don't have to do anything like that. It's just that message and that analogy has been put in it. So for you guys that want to check out the Success Hotline, I got it right here for you, 973-743-4690. Okay, so call in daily and there's a message waiting for you. And one of the last questions I
And
have
could I
for you.
just,
Yeah, go
since
ahead.
I'm sure so many of your callers are from SEC territory, and let's get one thing straight. Like every once in a while, I get a caller from Mississippi or Texas, and I have more callers from Texas than any other state. More people call me from Texas than call me from New Jersey.
Really?
And somebody says, you're okay, but I wish you didn't have an accent. Let's get something straight. You have the accent. I don't have the accent. Okay.
Oh, come on now. Come
Yeah.
on.
I mean, the Pilgrims landed in Plymouth, Massachusetts. They didn't land in Oxford, Mississippi.
Oh, that's awesome. Of course. So it's funny. I was thinking before we got on here, I was like, I wonder how long it's going to take him to say something about my accent and just being from down here and things like that. But it took you an hour and 15 minutes. Hey, so you were over what I was expecting. Um, and before I let you go, I'd be crazy not to say, Dr. Gilbert, uh, give me some of your resources. What are some things that, just let's take a coach for myself, uh, that's interested or, just would like to know more about it. What do you
Well, I
think are
mean,
some
one of the
great
things
resources?
is I personally train one-on-one. I train people to be great storytellers. And so, I mean, I charge for it, but I guarantee that they'll be a great storyteller, and they'll have a whole plethora of stories that they could use for the rest of their life. So, I mean, you could figure this out on your own, but I've already figured out how to train people to be great storytellers. And that's, when we went through school, like my area is sports psychology, and people say, what's sports psychology? And I said, you remember when you went to school and teachers gave you homework every night? And they say, yeah. I said, they told you what to study, right? Did they ever teach you how to study? No. So that's what sports psychology is. Coaches are always saying, relax, concentrate, get motivated, but never telling the kids how to. So everybody's saying, like I've been saying, be a great storyteller. And the thing is, you're already a great storyteller. We practice telling stories as much as we practice doing everything. But, I study what the really good storytellers do. And, so I just tweak a little things, and it happens to be very effective.
If they want more information on that
Yeah,
class,
just get
where
in
do they
touch
need
with
to
me.
go to? Okay.
My cell phone number is 973-985-4138, 973-985-4138. And my email address is sendmeastory@aol.com.
Any books, anything like that? I mean, you've authored a few books.
Yeah,
Talk
but
about those for a
I
second.
just say, if you're really serious, just call Success Hotline every day. And I'm not saying every message, but every once in a while, there'll be a message that you could, like this. I left a message. Was it yesterday? When you listened to the message, it was about the spark?
Yes, that was
Yeah,
yesterday. Yes.
yeah. And so a guy left me a message. He said, I want to thank you so much because tomorrow, meaning Sunday, one of my closest friends died in an accident, and they want me to give the eulogy. And this is perfect. It's but because he had the spark,
Yes.
of course, if you didn't hear the message, but, so I was able to help him without even knowing I was helping him.
Yes. Yes. Well, as we finish up this, first off, Dr. Gilbert, thank you for taking time. This is from the get-go, it's been awesome. From one that I'll never forget. And I know with people that listen to this, with plenty of notes and things like that. But also just, you impacting people with that Success Hotline. I know that I'll continue to call in. And now that I know that I can leave a message, you might be hearing from me more. So you might regret that. But I just want to thank you for being on this podcast, what you do for coaches, but also your students, and just appreciate what you're doing to make people better.
Yeah. Well, this whole thing, I've been looking at your Texas A&M thing, and, I'm not getting this story right. I just want to tell you this story. But Bill Parcells, the great football coach, and I think one of the first jobs he had, I think it was at Texas Tech. And, so Texas Tech, who knows, where in Texas it is, but they start their summer practice. And, it's 120 degrees in the shade, and they work out in the morning, they work out in the afternoon. And Bill Parcells notices this old guy with a notebook in the stands every single workout. And so after a couple of days of this, Parcells went to one of the other coaches. He said, "Oh, who is that guy?" He's an interesting story. His name is Gordon Woods. He travels here 2 hours every morning and goes home 2 hours every afternoon to go to both of our practices. He's the winningest coach in Texas high school football history. So that's what we're talking about. People who are willing to do more than expected are going to get more than expected. Nobody told Gordon Woods to go to Texas Tech. Nobody told him to drive 2 hours, wait between the workouts, stay for the second, just so he could pick up a few things. but he was hungry. He was hungry. And his kids knew this, and they picked that up from him. And maybe that's the most important thing they got from him.
Absolutely. What a way to end it. What a great
And
story.
the thing is, as we said, it cannot be taught, but it can be caught. You know, these things, everything we're talking about cannot be taught, but it can be caught.
Absolutely. Because you can't force anybody or teach anybody that passion and that spark right
Yeah.
there. Like you said, it's got to be caught. And with your players, you're even business wise, people under you, and they see that dedication and that type of just relentless pursuit, you know, that has to be caught, and they will catch on to that as long as it's being shown
Yeah.
and modeled. But again,
Well, now could I have the bad news? The bad news is everybody listening to this, you know, I gave you my cell phone number and I gave you my email address. And I know you have a story that I need to know. And I don't want to be controversial, but I just know this, Jake. I just know this. If you have a story that I need to know and you don't tell me, you're going to rot in hell for eternity. Now that's I hate to be so blunt, you know, but you know, you might say, is this guy kidding or not? Don't test it. Don't test it. You know, call me up and at least we'll trade stories.
exactly.
You know?
Exactly. Well, guys,
And
reach
you know
out.
what? I know that I don't know the best story. So could I end with one story, then we're done?
Yes, you go ahead. Keep
Okay.
going. I'm listening. I'm loving it.
So this is in olden times. And there was a very, very, very wise and very, very kind king. And he knew he was towards the end of his life. And he had a wonderful life and he made his kingdom very, very prosperous. But there was one problem. He and the queen never had any children. So nobody was going to take over the kingdom. So he brought the wisest man in the kingdom to him, Merlin the magician. He said, Merlin, you have to help me. We have to find somebody, an heir to take over. We need a prince or a princess that will take over the kingdom. He said, well, tell me, what has made you so successful? He said, you know, when I was growing up, my father always told me that as king, I was going to deal with problems. He said, in problems, you can't get stopped by the start. It's the start that stops most people. Most people get overwhelmed by problems because they don't attack them immediately. And so my whole life, as soon as I had a problem, I really dug into it until I solved it. And Merlin says, okay. And so Merlin said, I'll come back tomorrow and I'll have an answer for you. So the next day, Merlin comes back and said, here's what we're going to do. That I'm going to make this special suit of armor that's going to weigh 500, 600 pounds. And we're going to send out an announcement all over the kingdom to any young man or young woman that wants to be the next king or queen, that you come on a Saturday morning and we will test you, but we won't tell them what the test is. So about a month later, they had the test, and about 200 people from all over the kingdom came. And each and every person, they put on this huge, heavy suit of armor. And, you know, 500, 600 pounds. And rarely could a person take one step. The people that take 2 steps shuddered, and the people that took 3 steps, you know, passed out. So it's late in the day, and there are only a few people left. And there's this young, unassuming, not particularly big or strong looking guy, and they put on the suit of armor. And he takes his first step, and, you know, everybody didn't think he'd even do that. He was shuddering in the second step. The third step, they thought he was going to pass out, but he didn't. Then he took the 4th step and the 5th step, and he had to take 500 steps all the way up to the castle. That's how they choose, that he had to take all 500 steps. So he's going and going. And then the amazing thing is, the harder it got, the better he did. The closer he got to the castle, the faster he went. Then when he got up to the 500th step, he took off his headgear, and the king gave him the biggest hug. And he said, you are the heir apparent. You will follow me as king. And he said, but let me ask you, most people didn't make the first step, but then they didn't make the second step. You made not only the 3rd step, you made all 500 steps. How could you do it? He said, I don't know if Merlin put a spell on me, But once I got past the third step, it got easier and easier and easier. And the closer I got to the castle, it felt lighter and lighter. And I could actually go faster and faster. And the king turned to Merlin. He said, did you have anything to do with this? He said, yes, sire. Remember you told me that you wanted to find the person that wasn't stopped by the star? Well, what I did is right in the headpiece, I put a magnet. And he said, see at the flagpole, there was another magnet, and they were attracted. But the magnet didn't start its power until after the third or fourth or fifth step. So what he's saying, the closer he got, the more powerful the magnet was, and the more it drew him up. So this will be a great king because he knows how to deal with problems, and he won't get stopped by the start.
Wow. You have a gift. You have a great gift of story. That is amazing.
No. That's exactly. People say, I have my students, I tell them a story. I tell them this story. I tell fire, water, and trust are walking in the woods. And they're deep in the woods, and one of them says, hey, what are we going to do if we get lost from each other? And fire says, oh, don't worry. Just look for the smoke. That's where I'll be. And water said, oh, don't worry. If we get lost from each other, look for the green grass. That's where I'll be. And trust said, if you lose me, you better worry, because if you lose me, you'll never find me again. So I tell that story. Then I have a student tell a story. And then I say, who tells the story better, you or me? And they said, well, you do, of course. And I said, why? And he said, you're a better storyteller. I said, no, I've told that story 2,000 times. If you tell the story 2,000 times, you'll tell it just as well. So, you know, it's all training. It's going back to the very beginning. It's all training. And, you know, I mean, I'm pretty well trained. For the last 11,170 days, I leave a message on Success Hotline.
You've had a lot of practice. That's
so
awesome.
You know, and this is true for all of us. It's not what, you know, people every once in a while, they ask me, well, what do you get out of doing Success Hotline? I mean, I don't charge people, but it's not what you get from it. It's what you become by it. And it's like that in sports. It's not what you get from playing baseball. It's what you become from playing baseball.
Absolutely. That's outstanding. That's amazing. Again, I don't want you to go, man. I can sit here and listen to stories all day and continue this conversation. But again, I want to respect your time. And Dr. Gilbert, I want to appreciate you. I appreciate you and what you've done. I know we'll continue to talk. And I know you've motivated our listeners to call you and give that story, or they know what's going to happen.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is, they're probably saying, what does a northerner know about the great hereafter? And I know quite a bit, you know, because some of my friends haven't told me stories, and I know where they are right now. Well, you know that story. You know that story. There were two buddies that loved baseball. They played high school baseball together. They played college baseball together. They played minor base together, and they were lifelong friends. And one of them dies. And then he's comes to you know, he goes to heaven, and then he comes to his friend in a dream, and he said, well, there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is you're going to be playing baseball. Oh no, he said the good news is we up in heaven, we have a ball team, we have a team. There's a whole league for us. The bad news is you're pitching tomorrow.
Oh, wow. But he let him know that. That's awesome. Well, again, I appreciate you being on here today. I appreciate what you do. I look forward to talking with you more. I look forward to sharing more stories with you and seeing where this thing goes, because I think teaching and stories and the things that you do are exactly what we need today, and that can inspire and give that spark to our kids, because it's got to be caught. And I agree with you 110% there. So I appreciate you being on with us today.
Well, it's my pleasure.